Good evening, everybody. Kevin J. Johnston here. Welcome to episode 62 of the Tax and Money Show that plays every single Tuesday at 9 p.m. live right here on freedomreport.ca, TikTok, Restream, Instagram. We're on all of them, everybody. So please, by all means, stick around for the next 2 hours. We've got a great guest joining us very shortly here. That would be Rob Anders, who is a former member of Parliament. We're going to discuss the implications of this ridiculous election that we have just gone through, everybody. And for those out there who want my personal opinion, I'm not going to dwell on this because Rob Anders is going to cover it very well tonight. Yes, the only way for Saskatchewan and Alberta, those two Canadian provinces that are in the middle of the country, to survive is to leave. There is no longer any way to rescue the country. In my humble opinion, as a guy who's followed politics for 25 years. But we have a better opinion than mine coming in for politics. Someone who actually was a member of Parliament for 18 years in Calgary. He stood toe-to-toe with that Trudeau guy we all know and hate so much, and knows everything about the Canadian banking system and, of course, everything about Canadian politics. And just like myself, has been a victim of police assaults, police interference, police everything, because he simply disagrees with the wrong political opinion and happens to have the correct political opinion. Rob Anders, welcome back to the show. So good to see you, and I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, sir.
Well, Rob, let's get right into this. For our American friends and our Aussie friends who are watching right now, Canada just had another election for the federal government. Justin Trudeau was the leader of the Liberal Party. Ergo, he was the crime minister. Now we got this new guy who just kind of showed up and somehow won. Rob, as an 18-year veteran of Canadian politics, longer with your knowledge base, please tell us what happened.
Well, you know, the Liberals finally understood that Trudeau was going to drag them down. So they needed a fresh face, somebody different, something, to put a new face on the party. And I suspected it was going to be Mark Carney, because Mark Carney was basically given directions for Trudeau, economic advice, etc., in the background for years. And he's smarter. He is slicker. He is more Teflon than Trudeau was. So that made perfect sense. They did their polling, and any of the ministers that they had were too tainted with regard to Justin. Too much face exposure, too much. Public was already tired of them, didn't want to see them. So they brought in Carney. And like I said, I mean, Carney, the thing that scares me the most about Carney is that he can look down a camera lens and calmly talk about allocating $150 trillion with a T to the green agenda. And just to put that in perspective, that's 100 times the size of the Canadian national debt. And that is 4.5 times the size of the US debt. So when he talks about allocating $150 trillion to the green agenda, that's not his money. That's not even Canada's money. Like he's going to use central bank digital currency, which he is the biggest advocate of, to manipulate people's money into doing things they don't want to do. It's really evil stuff. And something else that people don't really grasp onto about this guy, we just said Canada's debt's 1.6 trillion. He was involved in some of the most corrupt stuff, probably the biggest swindle in history. Whereas the governor of the Bank of England, he was encouraging those banks to basically take on all sorts of crappy European debt. Like Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain have about $6 trillion in debt between the four of those countries. And the US has 36 trillion in debt. It's a real issue, but they're trying to get control of that. And they're trying to use their Federal Reserve to go ahead and control what they're doing in terms of their M2 money supply. The other thing they're doing is they're taking a page out of Milei in Argentina by cutting back government expenditures. There's a couple ways that you can affect the M2 money supply, and that's the best one. What Milei is doing, and what the Doge Department of Government Efficiency is doing in the U.S. But anyhow, they also have debt, for example, in the UK, that
Right.
is U.S. denominated debt, okay, that is issued by European banks. And you say, what's that all about? Well, let's say you had $100,000 US, and I put it into a bank just south of me here down in Idaho. Let's say, for example,
Right.
Bank of America. Well, they could loan out, according to Federal Reserve rules, $140,000. But if you take that same $100,000 and you put it in Barclays Bank in London, in England, all of a sudden they can loan out millions because they don't care what you do with American denominated money. They care about it with regard to the European stuff, but not the American stuff. So since 1945, there's been a lot, trillions of dollars, that's been bought by the Soviet countries who wanted to have American dollars sometimes, but didn't want it under the control of the U.S. Federal Reserve, or the mafia, gangsters, organized crime. They loved that stuff. But now
Right.
we've got the situation where Carney promised these people that if he became the prime minister, he was going to issue U.S. denominated debt in Canadian, uh, from Canadian banks. And he's going to call it global bonds, green bonds, whatever. And so as a result, of course, the sick men of Europe with that $6 trillion debt are going to want to suck those things up. And if we took on half of the EU debt, it'd be 10 trillion. If we took on the entire EU debt, it would be 20 trillion. So even Canada's little debt of 1.6 trillion, which is bad, but it would go to 21.6 trillion. So if any one of those countries default, Canadians are screwed. And that's Mark Carney for you.
All right. So you're talking about fractional reserve banking there, where a bank only has let's say $100,000, and they go ahead and they loan out 10, 100, 1,000 times what they actually have, and then they're charging interest on that money. So that's pumping trillions of dollars out into the market. But where do people earn those trillions of dollars to put them back into the bank that issued it in the first place? Or do they?
Well, it's all super risky, right? So the Federal Reserve allows that if you put a $100,000 deposit in with a U.S. bank, that bank can loan out $140,000. But
Okay.
the UK doesn't have those restrictions. So if you take that same $100,000 and put it into a UK bank like Barclays, for example, well, all of a sudden they can loan out millions based on that
Right.
100,000. And so that's what Carney's all about. Like that was one of the biggest swindles in history. And what the U.S. tried to do with regard to that debt is they said they wanted it to settle at end of business day, like the Bank of International Settlements. Okay, but the Europeans were trying to ride it over 30, 60, 90 days, and all they had to do was estimate what the differential was between those. So they were pocketing huge amounts of dough. It was corrupt. And Carney was encouraging that. And now he's risking Canadians' money with that, Canadian banks with that. And one of the worries I have is that, say, for example, Portugal defaults, Greece defaults. There's going to be a run on the banks in those countries. And then what if you have a run on the banks in Canada? And some people say that Donald Trump might have actually wanted Carney to win over Pierre Poilievre. But if you run on the banks in Canada, which holds some of the mortgages in the United States, what's to prevent a run on the banks in the United States? It's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's incredibly dangerous. And I'm shocked that Trump did not interfere in the Canadian election to try to get Poilievre in. Not that I'm a huge Poilievre fan. I'm really not, but I would still rather have seen him in place, because Poilievre's plans, if he had a minority government, would never have come to fruition anyway. The Liberals would have gotten in his way. Why do you think that Trump did not interfere in the Canadian election and allowed this Carney nonsense to take place?
Well, there's some speculation that by having Carney and the Liberals back in, Alberta and Saskatchewan were going to say, okay, that this is too much. We've endured 10 years of Liberal government and mismanagement and punishing our industries and what have you, and we're ready to go. We're ready to leave. And I was at a rally, for example, last night, and there was 1,000 people there, and I have to say that was probably the most intense separatist rally that I've ever seen in this country. So anyhow, so that people say that might have been part of the rationale for it, but I wonder if that's playing too cute, because, like I said, if there's a run on the banks in Portugal or Greece, and there's a run on banks in Canada, I don't know how the United States skates free of that.
Well, I don't know either. And that is where I'm most deeply concerned. And with Canada, where I'm really bothered by this 1.6 to 1.7 trillion dollar debt that the country currently has, is Canada's only got what, 42 million people, 11 million of which have come into Canada from 1993 forward, most from countries where they hate the Western world. So we have potentially 18 million people not working. Now, how would we ever pay that debt off? Any idea, or just does it never get paid off?
Well, I think that this is kind of the underlying intention of Carney. Like, he's smart enough to understand that by taking on, whether it's 6 or 10 or 20 trillion dollars of European debt, he's going to bankrupt us. Like, he clearly understands that. I mean, if I get it, he understands it. So I think what he's trying to do is literally collapse our economic system to drive everything towards central bank digital currency, because that's what central bankers love, is the idea that you don't have any options. Now it's the Bank of Canada, in his case, setting an exchange rate, with the Bank of England setting an exchange rate with the Chinese, like China, we've discussed this before, but they love this stuff because, China has a problem where if they actually allow a free floating currency, the stuff just flows out of there like nobody's business. And it's the reason why the Vancouver real estate market is so bloated, is because people would rather have their money in a property in Vancouver and Shaughnessy sprouting up weeds than to have it in a bank in China where it can be taken away and it can be expired and disappear into thin air like pixie dust. So I understand why the Chinese don't want to have money in their banks. They suck. But if Carney has his way, you're not going to be able to have, taxi drivers, kind of cutting a separate deal from what Venezuela officially says is the exchange rate to what you can get in a cab in Caracas or something like that, or in Beijing. All of a sudden, if you get rid of cash, all you've got is central bank digital currency, which, I've been harping on for quite some time. And now you're stuck with whatever the central bankers have agreed to. It's a terrible situation.
It is. And I'm going to tell you something. I've been in Panama now for a year. This country loves cash. Cash floats everywhere. Even though every single retail establishment in the city has a tap device of some type. Every restaurant, every bar, every business, every theater, every bowling alley, the Panamanians pay cash. And it grants them the capacity to make all kinds of crazy deals. Like I bought 40 avocados for $10. I just said, amigo, all Diaz, that's it. Diaz. And you slap down your $10 bill and walk away with whatever you like. Can't do that with a central bank digital currency. If that same guy put it down at $20, it's $20. There's no way to change that. There's no way to make a deal. And in central bank digital currency, if they feel like making your money expire, then that's exactly what's going to happen. So look, can we talk about Mark Carney? For those who don't know who I'm talking to, on Instagram over here, on TikTok here, and on Kick over here. This is Rob Anders, who was a member of Parliament in Canada, stood toe-to-toe with Trudeau a number of times. I don't think you enjoyed the experience very much, and knows everything there is to know about the Canadian banking system and, of course, Canadian politics. He's no longer a member of Parliament, but still lives in the Calgary area and is still very active in politics within the country. That's whom I'm speaking to. So maybe we could get you to explain central bank digital currency first. Just explain it to people, and then explain right after that, why would Carney or anybody want this to be the norm in every country? Please go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's all about control. The simplest way to explain central bank digital currency is just look at what they're doing with digital currency in China. China has gone the furthest down the route with central bank digital currency of any country. So if you criticize the government, then you can't buy a plane ticket, a train ticket, a bus ticket. You can't get a government job. You can't leave and get travel documents, etc. They pay you in it. And if you have in your wallet, for example, in a digital wallet, they can say, well, you have to spend that money on an electric vehicle, and if you don't do that within 6 months, it's just going to disappear. So you better do it. Just like when Carney talks about spending $150 trillion on the green agenda, the only way you can possibly allocate that retarded amount of money, because it's 4.5 times the U.S. national debt, is you're going to manipulate people through central bank digital currency to do things they otherwise would never do. Like, for example, I love a good old Chevy Suburban metal bumper, truck. Okay. And if I had to buy something newer, because they only made the metal bumpers up to 2006, I would buy like a Ford with a big solid, metal bumper. Okay. But if Carney says, well, you're getting your pension in CBDC, or your government paycheck in CBDC, or what have you, and we have a wallet with your CBDC, and we're going to tell you that you have to within 6 months, buy one of our, little puddle jumper, electric vehicles. Then what choice do you have? Because otherwise you got to spend it the way they want. Otherwise they're going to just cancel it. It just disappears. It's like what they did with the people who supported the truckers. They can just seize your accounts. I mean, you look at that. That's exactly where this is going. That's the intention.
Now, how does any of this help the economy grow?
Well, I'm sure that these tree hugger types would say that, oh, well, we don't like how you're allocating your money. You're buying too much ammunition, or you're driving and wasting too much fuel, or you're smoking too many cigarettes, or you're eating too much bacon, or whatever they think you're doing that's wrong. And they would say, you need to instead be buying an electric vehicle, and you need to be riding around on a bicycle, and you need to have solar panels installed on your roof, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ergo, we're going to force you to do that. We're going to force you to make these decisions that you wouldn't otherwise normally make, because we're controlling your currency and you have no other option. That's what this is all about. Central bank digital currency is all about control. The Soviets actually tried this stuff back when they created Gazbank in 1917 in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, and they nationalized all the banks. There were more banks in Russia at that time than there are chartered banks in Canada. So it's easier to nationalize the banks in Canada than it is what they did in Soviet Russia in 1917. And so, but they didn't have the digital abilities that there are now. And the Soviet experiment nearly disappeared off the face of the earth, and they had to revert to minting silver coins in 1921 and gold coins finally in 1923, when 10 million people were starving to death out of 130 million people population at the time. But now that they have digital currency and central bank digital currency, the ramifications of this stuff, the evil of this stuff, and the global aspect of this stuff, it's so far beyond what happened even to Weimar Republic Germany in the 1920s and 30s, or what happened to Russia in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. Just look at China and imagine the whole world operating under that system. It's terrible.
Yeah, and for those who don't know what you're talking about there, Rob, is that China right now, they have a digital currency, and like Rob said, if you criticize the government, they just deduct fines straight from your bank account. If you jaywalk, they deduct the fine directly from your bank account. You know what's frightening, though, is Ford did make an announcement. I think they've retracted it, but they made an announcement that they were going to be working with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to issue speeding tickets automatically to you when their vehicles detected you speeding on Canadian highways. Now, they got a ton of backlash for that, but your thoughts? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, all this stuff ties in, right? Whether it's this concept of 15-minute cities. I mean, in London, for example, in England, you're only supposed to drive on certain days of the week, and if you go beyond that, then they're going to assess fines, and it's really ugly stuff. And I remember sitting in a transport committee meeting in the House of Commons. This is a couple decades ago. Reg Alcock was the chair of the committee. He's since passed away, an MP in the Winnipeg area for the Liberals. And they were talking about intelligent transportation systems. And I remember I was sitting there as a Reform Party MP at that time in my 20s and watching this stuff. And I thought, well, why the hell would you want to have cameras at every damn traffic light? Like, that's expensive. And who the hell needs that? Who wants it? What's the point of that? And now I realize with this tracking that they have, they talked about at the time, 20 years ago, let's say, about how this would be able to judge the number of cars at a given light and change the lights to red or green to facilitate quicker traffic flow. And you're like, well, that's a lot of hoo-ha with cameras and stuff for that. And it seems a bit much. But now you realize with their capabilities that they have 20 years later, this stuff was about tracking individual license plates, who you are, where you're going, how far you're traveling, how much gas you're using, whether or not you're a bad environmentalist because you're choosing to travel for several hours to go someplace they don't want you to go. Like, that's what this stuff's all about. And when I first saw this, I just thought, what a tremendous waste of resources. But now you realize what a controlling agenda this is.
I find it a little interesting. City of Calgary, I ended up getting 4 speeding tickets in Calgary. There's one specific road that had cameras on it. What I would do, though, is I would fight each one in court and then make a demand for full disclosure. And the City of Calgary, the Crown attorney, I guess, would always drop the ticket a day before you were going into court. They would actually email you that they've withdrawn the case. They don't like it when you fight these tickets. They know that they have no law that says that they can actually do this. Why? Because technically speeding is a crime, and that's where you get a fine for it. And then you can win in court if you decide to take it to court. But because there's no witness to the crime, a camera cannot be a witness. There's that loophole where you always win. But will Carney change the laws to allow these cameras to actually be a definitive decision maker?
Well, Carney frankly lied during the election campaign and said, oh, I'm going to give everybody a break on the carbon tax, etc. But, if you look at this guy's track record, he's commented about how he thought the carbon tax was too little, that it needed to be higher to influence, public opinion and to get people to change their behaviors. So just give him a little bit of time. He's just announced his cabinet. This guy in the core of his soul and being wants to raise carbon taxes so that he alters people's behavior because he doesn't like how you behave, you see. And this inflation that's going to be caused by taking on trillions of dollars in European debt, my gosh. The bankruptcy, the inflation, the default potential of all this is just astronomical for a country the size of Canada with regard to our population and banking system to be taking on Europe's debt. It's ridiculous.
Well, we can't do it. Canadians are just not good enough at business to do it. They really aren't.
It makes no sense. Of course, it makes no sense. But I mean, unless what you want to do is bring in central bank digital currency and control what everybody does and be able to be a dictator with, honestly, powers that Stalin, Mao, and Hitler would have drooled over. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
It's easy with technology. So I'm willing to bet myself that he does try to alter the laws to allow video cameras to be the decision maker on tickets and not allow you to fight them in court, which is what the administrative penalty system is in the province of Ontario anyway. If you get a parking ticket or a red light ticket in the province of Ontario, you actually are guilty until proven innocent. It's bizarre that we've allowed this type of thing to happen. Ooh. Speaking of the Liberal Party, the cabinet. Could you explain what the cabinet is? And then I'd like to talk about the selections that were made for the Liberal Party cabinet. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, he's got half of the same people that Trudeau did, and some of the worst of them, like Guilbeault, who is a total environmental, So yeah, I mean, so I don't know how anybody can expect this fourth go round of the Liberals after 10 years to be any better. I was so disheartened to see people in Eastern Canada decide that they were going to give the Liberals a fourth go round at this. It's just profoundly sad. Like if he, if the first 3 terms of Trudeau didn't destroy the economy enough, you're going to give Carney, who's even more evil and depraved with regard to these policies, a kick at the can for a fourth Liberal term. Speechless. And like I said, I was at 3 different meetings yesterday with regard to Alberta independence. First was a press conference, then a lunch, and then a massive rally in the evening with 1,000 people, where everybody, when asked the question about whether Alberta wanted to become a sovereign country, stood up in agreement with that. I'm not sure that movement's stoppable, because the math is just overwhelming. I mean, in Alberta's case, $360 billion that's been over contributed with regard to the pension system. To basically prop up the rest of the country. It just becomes untenable with these characters having a 4th term, and also simultaneously trying to, shut down, pipelines in the oil patch and everything else, which is such a huge component of the Alberta economy. It's a very sad scenario of the election.
Oh, it is. And we're going to cover Alberta's sovereignty in a few minutes. Don't worry, folks, it's coming. Promise. But the cabinet now, so the Liberal cabinet, these are just people that have jobs and titles, and I guess they're supposed to be either authoritarians or just experts in their field to, I guess, advise the Prime Minister? Is that what it is?
Well, sadly, very rarely do cabinet ministers get chosen for expertise in a given field. I'm going to tell some stories here. So, for example, Carolyn Bennett, raving feminist Liberal, progressive, downtown Toronto. Not my cup of tea. But was a medical doctor. Got elected and desperately wanted to be the Minister of Health. She actually understood healthcare. And the most they would ever allow her to do was to sit on the health committee. And even that they didn't really enjoy, because she kind of knew too much. And so they intentionally put in people who kind of let the bureaucrats run the show often. I remember Lawrence Macaulay, was a potato farmer from Prince Edward Island. Nice man, very jovial, happy-go-lucky, kind of guy. He was labor minister. And I remember one time where they had some push-button strike legislation that we were bringing through that unions wanted and the bureaucracy wanted and what have you. It was terrible for business. And we went to him with a bunch of objections about it. And I have to give Lawrence Macaulay credit, because he was honest. And he said to us, I don't disagree with you in terms of what you're arguing and the problems with the bill. He said, but I and my staff, we don't have the resources to fight my department. So he was just going to let it go, because he didn't want to take on his own department. He liked being labor minister. He liked being a minister, and he wasn't going to challenge what they wanted to do. That was honest. That was incredibly honest of him. And there were many others, that were like that. So I remember when I first was elected, I had a very capable staffer, Angela. Her husband was a pathologist, and she was a graduate of the University of Calgary, involved in debate as we all were. And she really researched human resources development, which is the biggest check writing arm of the federal government, and newer stuff. So anyhow, we bumped into him at the Governor General's residence for a soiree, a function, and she went up and started asking questions. And she came back to me and she said, he clearly doesn't understand his portfolio, pure pedigree. And it was the biggest, like I said, $60 billion check writing arm of the federal government. And he clearly didn't understand his portfolio. He didn't know the difference between the right and the left hand, with regard to that department. A lot of times ministers just read the briefing notes that their staff prepare for them. And thank God that they get questions in question period, and that staffers in the minister's office endeavor to put together talking points, because in doing so, they sometimes say, oh, that's a problem, we should try to fix that, and put pressure on the bureaucracy to try to correct a problem. But no, very, very, very rarely does a minister actually know their portfolio. I think one of the few examples I can think of was David Emerson, because he understood softwood lumber. It's a complicated file. And he even transitioned over from the Liberal government to the Conservative government, Harper, because Chrétien told Harper that he's one of the few guys who actually understood the softwood lumber agreement and could deal with the Americans on it in an incredible way. But that's not the norm in cabinet selection.
Well, it seems that way. Let's cover some of the people that have been selected as of today by Prime Minister Mark Carney. We've got Anita Anand appointed as foreign minister, becoming the first Hindu woman to hold this position. Now, why? Why do you need a Hindu woman to hold this position? Go ahead.
Well, I'm trying to calibrate exactly when this happened in Canadian politics, but we basically have a system now where it's like checking boxes. Gender, sexual preference, color, etc. And so, they want to have a shot when the cameras come in on the prime minister answering a question in question period that looks very diverse. And so, in Alberta politics, for example, we had a lot of white men that were elected as members of parliament in the Alberta caucus. But, because you weren't a woman and because you weren't an ethnic minority, a visible minority, or you didn't have an interesting, kind of sexual preference or something like that, you weren't going to make cabinet. And that's just, the way it was. And so I'm trying to remember when this would have been, but certainly Trudeau Sr., going back to Pierre, fell victim to this or was part of this in this whole, diversity stuff and whatever, so that he was picking people based on that rather than just on merit. So prime ministers don't really pick people based on merit largely. It's kind of on, we need a woman, we need a visible minority, we needed this, we needed that, we need a diverse cabinet, etc. We want to have that reflective of the broad-based country, etc. And only a few ministers, finance, for example, they actually have to generally choose somebody who has respect on either Bay Street or Wall Street, because they're going to be, marketing our treasury bills and bonds. But
this woman is supposed to be representing the country and be taken seriously, and no one's going to take Canada seriously. We've had 9 years of not being taken seriously because of Trudeau. Now we've got this. So now let's move on to the second one. We have Mélanie Joly, transitioned from foreign affairs to serve as the Minister of Industry. Now, Mélanie Joly, I don't imagine that she's ever run a factory or she's ever owned a major corporation. I can't imagine she's some kind of major investment guru. Why does she have that position? Same thing?
Yeah, well, Harper used to comment about how the best determiner of whether or not somebody was going to be an effective minister was whether they had managerial experience. So did they manage, a company of 100 or 500 or whatever employees, so that they actually had some managerial chops. And a lot of ministers don't. And they get put in because of window dressing, because of their gender or ethnicity or sexual preference or, whatever. And then as a result, they just do whatever the bureaucrats tell them. They don't have either the knowledge in the given portfolio or the managerial experience to be able to go against the bureaucrats. And this is a real problem. I remember, a guy who was talking with a whole town hall full of Ottawa bureaucrats. And these were long-termers, right? Like they were done, they were retired, etc. And they were asking him questions. And he thought, well, okay, what are you guys up to with this? And their fear was that even if Pierre Poilievre won, and they knew what a mess Trudeau had made of the country, they understood that. But even if Poilievre had won, they were worried that he wouldn't have enough bench strength in the cabinet to actually fix a lot of the problems that Trudeau left them. And so we really are at a dearth of people with qualifications and the experience to to make some of these changes that are necessary.
Well, so far, 2 new cabinet ministers today who have no capacity to do the job that they've been selected for, not even hired for, just selected. So we have Francois Philippe Champagne continues in his role as finance minister. Yeah, give me the 30-second rundown. Does this guy know money or does this guy know nothing?
Well, I think that's just a reward for somebody who could have run in the leadership race, could have been a potential threat to Carney, keep your enemies closer type of thing. He does have some sort of cachet or following inside the Liberal Party, so that's his reward, is to give him a prominent post. I can't imagine that he has much cred in Bay Street or Wall Street. Like when we lost Jim Flaherty, who was a very capable finance minister, I had a lot of respect for Jim. We brought in Joe Oliver because he was a guy who worked on Bay Street and understood finance. But those characters are rare. The Liberals at one point had John McCallum. He was not the best of economists and worked for the Royal Bank type of thing, but at least he had that. He was terribly beholden to China with regard to his worldview and foreign affairs and what have you, and was captured by them. But was working against some of the Canadians that were actually held in captivity wrongly by the Chinese. So flawed in many respects, and gave away a lot of our military secrets to the Chinese Navy, for example. So a terrible minister of national defense. And anyhow, but at least he had been an economist, and that's why he got given that role by the Liberals at that point in time.
All right. Next is Dominic LeBlanc retains his position overseeing U.S. trade relations. Now, I've never heard anything positive in any media outlet, conservative or liberal, about this guy. So who is this guy? And what does he really do?
Well, Dominic comes from a lineage, a family, because his father was prominent in liberal politics. And so he's kind of, it's like an alumnus, you go to Harvard and, you might not have the best grades, but, your dad went to Harvard and your granddad went to Harvard, and there's a trust fund that's established in your name or whatever. And so you're kind of in. And that's the case with Dominic. His father was a player in liberal politics. And so he comes from a liberal family. I mean, Trudeau Senior even married into that by choosing, a cabinet minister's daughter in Margaret Trudeau, type of thing. So that's how Dominic comes by this business. His father's involvement.
Yeah, of course. Next, we have Chrystia Freeland. She stays in her role as the Minister of Transport and Internal Trade. Now, Chrystia Freeland, everybody, she's the one. She really did think that she was beautiful. She thought she was just the hottest model going. She would always wear short skirts that were way too short. And there's actually a photograph of her, we'll call it, with 65 pounds of cottage cheese sticking out of her dress. And I put that image in my book, Masks Are BS, to discuss at length how childish and unprofessional our entire government really is. And she's got this tweak problem. She can't sit still. She can't stand still. She can't get through a sentence without clicking in some way. Are we talking about someone who's having a mental breakdown, or are we talking someone who's got a drug problem?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I had a little tiny, witsy bitsy measure of respect for her with regard to Ukraine, just in the sense that she had spent time there and she was a journalist over there and kind of understood the situation and, what Putin and Russia were up to, everything else. So I had a tiny little modicum of sympathy for that. She is punching way above her weight in some of the portfolios that she's been given. So once again, there's really a problem with bench strength. What else can you say?
Well, about her, it would all be insults, and it's not why we're here. So I'm just going to move on to the next placement today. We've got Evan Solomon, former journalist, appointed as Minister of Artificial Intelligence, a newly established position. Don't you have to have intelligence before you could start monitoring and ministering artificial intelligence? I mean, first off, who is this guy, and what is this department really going to be doing?
Well, I was at a conference on the weekend, Cornerstone, where we were going through some of these things. I have some issues with crypto and with artificial intelligence, and the reason for that is all you need is one, geomagnetic event, a Carrington event, electromagnetic pulse, or polar, magnetic pole shifts, whatever, and this stuff, has serious flaws. So that's part of the reason I'm a big backer of cash, and that cash should be backed up by gold and silver, because they don't disappear with a geomagnetic event, like binary zeros and ones, So, but anyhow, once again, I think the next one we're going to get to, because he actually worked for Goldman Sachs, that's probably the guy who should actually be the finance minister, regardless of what you think of Goldman Sachs. They probably have the street cred to be able to market treasury bills and bonds.
Okay, and our next placement, Tom Hodgkin, former Goldman Sachs CEO, named Minister of Natural Resources. Tim Hodgkin, what do you think about this individual?
Well, I can't say that I've interacted with this character, but the fact that you're from Goldman Sachs and had some cachet and weight there, I would suspect, because Champagne doesn't have that type of track record, I would suspect that what's going to happen is, after this individual learns the ropes, learns where the bathrooms are, where the next cabinet shuffle might be, let's say, when do they do this? They're going to do it. They're going to wait. They wouldn't probably do it as early as summer. That'd be too soon. But next summer, or even in the fall, if they have some real doozies that happen to them in the fall legislative session. So a Christmas shuffle or summer shuffle next year, that's probably where you'd see this guy become Minister of Finance. They didn't want to stick him right into it, but he would be better qualified than Champagne, I would suspect.
All righty. And we have our final one here. Eleanor Ojewski in Edmonton Center. She's an Edmonton Center Member of Parliament, appointed as Minister of Emergency Management and Community Resilience, and also responsible for Prairie's economic development in Canada. Now, the big problem with that is it's a liberal. Liberals hate Western Canada. They hate farmers. They hate conservatives. They hate Christians. They hate everything that you would find on the prairies. So what the hell now?
Well, she's kind of filled the role that Anne McClellan had. I mean, Anne McClellan was, a feminist liberal lawyer, right? But she was the regional minister for Alberta and had a lot of swath, because Alberta is the largest, population-wise compared to Saskatchewan and Manitoba, so the prairies. And so this lady will have she'll run the minister's regional office in Edmonton. And she will have tremendous swath with regard to any diversification programs that come out, the stuff that's decided by the Federal Investment Bank, any regional development money, etc. Her office will be overseeing all of that. Whether or not she has the expertise to be doing that is another matter, but that's kind of the role that person will serve. Anne McClellan wasn't qualified particularly to do that either, but because she was one of the few Liberals who got elected on the prairies and in Alberta, she became the person in charge of all that stuff.
And I don't have the last name here, but the former mayor of Vancouver, who somehow managed to double housing and condo prices during his tenure, is also been appointed to something. Another member of the finance committee here. So how could a municipal mayor be selected for that position? Is this just part of Carney's plan to bankrupt the country? Is that what's happening here?
Well, My guess is that he looks at that and he says, okay, well, he was a mayor of Vancouver. He obviously won the beauty contest or popularity contest to be the mayor. And let's face it, the reason the Liberals hung on in this election was because of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. That's it. So they if they can hold on to those three population centers, that's how they've just squeaked out to stay in power. And so they figured that the guy having previously been elected mayor of Vancouver is going to be able to hold on to some of those votes for them.
All right. And that's actually not a bad point. So we've got Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and Vancouver. And these cities are horrendously liberal, and they have more votes between those four cities than all of Western Canada does. So really, essentially, in Montreal, Toronto at 9 p.m. Eastern time, or 10 p.m. Eastern time, sorry, when the election is over there, the election's over for the entire country. So this now brings me to why many people are watching tonight, and that is Alberta separation. Now, let's get your thoughts on this. You are an Albertan. You've served the people of Alberta in Calgary West for a long time, 18 years, in fact. Let's get your take on it. First off, just you as a seasoned former politician, what's your thought on Alberta leaving Canada?
Well, I think it just comes down to math. We're about $360 billion overpaid with regard to the Canada Pension Plan. If Alberta was to get even a fraction of that back, we would be way further ahead. So it just comes down to math. Like, we put in $9 billion a year on pensions. We only draw out 6, so we leave a net 3. For the rest. We over contribute in employment insurance by $1 billion a year compared to what we put in and we take out. So now it's up to $4 billion a year. We send 70 in total, $70 billion into Ottawa every year, and we only get back $27 billion in services. Right. So, you're talking $43 billion that we leave to the bureaucracy, in Ottawa and funding daycare in Quebec, $15 billion a year, et cetera, et cetera. So it just comes down to math. Quebec has held 2 referendums on separation, didn't win, but, got, daycare paid for by us and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and gets Hydro-Quebec exempted from any, carbon calculations and, all that type of stuff, and equalization and transfer payments and all this stuff. So I think Alberta's just got to the point where we realize that Carney, Trudeau, Guilbeault, all these guys, they hate the oil patch. They want to shut down Alberta oil and natural gas. They want to shut down pipelines. And so much of our economy depends on that. And it, like I said, we're leaving $43 billion a year in Ottawa that otherwise, we could spend. So it just comes down to math. I was meeting with some Saskatchewan people on the weekend as well who want to join the movement, and I think that. For those who are Captain Canada, and I know there are those out there who feel very Captain Canada, I know they exist, and I would say to the Captain Canada types on this issue, let Alberta figure out a better scenario. Let us figure out a better constitution, a better arrangement with regard to transfers and equalization and all that stuff, so that Alberta is not subsidizing socialism and getting raped. Okay, let us figure that out. And when we develop that constitution and renegotiate that, or present a new form of a new scenario, a new federation, whatever you want to call it, let the other provinces then take a look at it and say, you know what, is that a more just situation? Is that a better scenario for the country? Because by us leaving $43 billion a year with Ottawa, we have been grossly subsidizing socialism across the rest of the country. I could tell you so many stories where I sat in Alberta caucus, on Wednesday mornings from 8 until 10 a.m., where members of Parliament would complain about Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Now, Alberta doesn't have an ocean. We don't have tidewater, but we had Department of Fisheries and Oceans with so many damn staff, with so much time on their hands, that they would harass ranchers who had had that land in their family for generations, since before Alberta was a province in 1905 even. And these people would come on their property and say, oh, but for a brief few weeks in the spring, that stream is navigable. If you put a kayak on it, you could maybe go 50 feet, type of thing. Ergo, if you chop holes into that stream in the middle of the winter to allow those cattle to drink from that stream the way they've been doing for 100 years on that ranch, you are therefore allowing them to defecate on that stream, and therefore are in violation of some obscure rule with regard to Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and therefore we're going to fine you, et cetera, et cetera. So we would recommend to fire half of the people working for Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Alberta, because if you've got that much time on your hands to harass a family that's been ranching that land for 100 years by cutting a hole in the ice so cattle can drink in the winter, you've got a problem. So we like I said, there's so many stories I could tell, that you just, I don't even like. I think somebody wrote this recently. I read this where Albertans aren't even angry. We're just done. We're tired of paying the bill, and getting the raw deal for it, and not having the engine that drives the economy. Most of the trade that we do, for example, with the United States is Alberta's oil and natural gas. It's the biggest ticket item that we sell to the United States. And so we're tired of paying all the bills and getting mistreated.
Well, something I can say. I mean, I moved from Ontario to Alberta in 2021. The people reminded me of the way Canada was in the 1980s. Friendly, parties. Rodeos are a good time. The cowboy nightclubs are a good time, and so on. But what I can say is the level of corruption in the Alberta court system. The Alberta court system, it honestly believes that it is the number one court in Canada. The way that the judges speak so highly of themselves and so highly of their own court system, it's over the top. It actually is very strange. I've been through the court systems in 4 different provinces, and the judges in Alberta, they're scary because of their delusional state, not because they are mean or because they're strong. None of them could stand up in a boxing ring with anybody, but they are very callous and very cold. I'm not sure I understand that particular thought process, because they're not helping Albertans by behaving this way. That's why I'm thinking that the not necessarily statehood for Alberta is what needs to happen, but at least to become a protectorate and try to change the court system there. Alberta's too corrupt to be an independent country. It wouldn't last. There's too many people trying to tell others what to do. Let me get your take on that.
Well, I'm going to go through a couple different scenarios.
Sure.
Say, for example, Alberta was to pursue an arrangement like Micronesia or Palau have with the United States, where it's considered a freely associated state. Okay, what does that mean? That means there's no federal income tax other than people who work directly for the federal government, and there's no import duties. So then all you'd have is a 10% provincial rate of income tax, territorial tax, which would make Alberta lower tax than either Wyoming or Alaska. It would be the lowest tax jurisdiction in North America. And it would be competitive even with Uruguay, which is 7%, right? So that's a pretty good scenario tax-wise. Another scenario is what Ireland did as a result of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, where Ireland set up its own constitution, its own legislature, and its own head of state. It's still part of the United Kingdom. It's still part of Great Britain, but it does its own thing. And that is actually much easier to do than if Alberta were to try and get a referendum with 50% plus one of people saying that they wanted to separate from Canada. Because as long as you have a governing party that's in power in Edmonton and the legislature that decides to go the route of what the Irish did in the 1930s, that gives us a tremendous amount of independence. I have lamented that whether it was Jason Kenney or going back to Ralph Klein, certainly Danielle Smith, we should have long ago not had Winnipeg or Ottawa collect taxes on our behalf. We collect our own corporate taxes in Alberta. All we need to do is to create an aspect of that now collects personal income taxes and get Winnipeg and Ottawa out of that so that we control those monies. We can do our own police. We've had the expansion of whether it's the Alberta sheriffs. We used to have the Alberta Provincial Police from 1916 to 1932, had a better track record than the Northwest Mounted Police did previous to 1916. We can take back firearms. That actually in the British North America Act is a provincial responsibility. Those licenses used to be issued by the provinces, not by the federal government. So we should be assuming that authority as well. So there's various things that we can do without even going the route of a referendum to achieve more independence for Alberta. On the judges, I think there's some merit in election of judges. I see that in the United States, and I'm just going to tell a story. I was taking a law class at the University of Calgary, and we had a lawyer who was teaching, a law professor, and he told the story about how there were arrangements behind the scenes, behind the curtains, arrangements over who'd get selected as judges. And so, for example, there was a vacancy in the judgeships. So a firm was tapped and said, it's your turn to send forward a judge, to us. Now, some lawyer at that firm, unbeknownst to the senior partners, had gone ahead on their letterhead and sent in an application. Okay. And they thought, the court system thought, oh, that's the judge that law firm wants. So they picked him up and they named him. And then it turns out that's not who the senior partners at the firm wanted at all. And so this person who had no qualifications to be a judge as a junior at the firm became a judge. Okay. But that just goes to show you the handshake and the arrangements, that go on with regard to this stuff. And I think that given the problems with that system, there's merit in having an election of sheriffs or judges. So there are ways to fix some of that. I'll also say, though, that with the National Citizens Coalition, which I used to work with, we would almost always challenge our cases, and some of them went up to the Supreme Court. We would challenge them through the Alberta courts because we found we had a better chance of achieving success through the Alberta courts than through any of the other systems in the country.
Alrighty. Well, that's so you and I have had two different experiences with the Alberta courts. Either way, that's a small potatoes issue here. The larger one is, does Alberta actually have a chance to leave Canada? Now, you've already given us the best case scenario for leaving, but can it leave?
Well, Danielle has lowered the threshold. The Premier's lowered the threshold for the number of signatures that are required for Citizens Initiative to 177,000. It's a percentage of the people who voted in the last election. So it's 10% of the 1.7 roughly million who voted in the last provincial election. The people that are looking to put that ballot question forward already have 240,000 signatures, so they're well in excess of the 177,000. So there will be a ballot question put. There's no doubt about that. The debate now is whether or not it'll happen later this year in 2025 or whether or not it'll happen in 2026, which is what the Premier and the Cabinet seem to prefer. But the organizers are looking to collect 400, 600, maybe 1 million signatures so that way they have the voter identification necessary to win. So if 1.7 million people turn out to vote in a referendum like happened in the last provincial election, if you've got 600,000 or 1 million or what have you identified as supporters, as signatories to put that citizens initiative forward, then they hope that they can turn that into a winning vote.
Let's hope so. Now, let's say though, the vote happens and the vote wins.
Mm-hmm.
Can Alberta still leave at that point? Can it leave? Is there any proviso for the Fed to stop the province from leaving?
Well, the groups in Alberta have already had meetings with the U.S. State Department with Marco Rubio's advisors. They very clearly stated that they would support Alberta sovereignty, Alberta independence. So I think as long as there's recognition by either the State Department, Governor of Montana, we've got former senators in Montana that are involved in some of these things with the Republican Party of Alberta now, and also the recognition of the President of the United States or the Office of the President, which we certainly have indications that that's the case as well. I think at that stage it would be. I don't think it would be to Canada's advantage to try to intervene. No.
Well, we certainly hope that Carney, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, wouldn't do something stupid like tell Trump that he can't have or can't help Alberta become part of the United States. I don't think that would bode well for him at all. And just for those out there who need reminding, I've got my name in the hat to run for mayor of Calgary because I want Calgary out of Canada and into the USA where it belongs. Calgary, as far as I'm concerned, is the last conservative city left in the country. And I would love to see it have a lot more economic interest and a lot of economic opportunity by going where the money is, because there is no money in Canada aside from Alberta. And I know this, Rob. I know how much money there is in Alberta because, as you know, I buy corporations that are in trouble all over the country. And even though I'm servicing all of Canada, more than half my clients are in the province of Alberta. What does that mean? Alberta is getting taxed more heavily than the rest of the country, essentially combined. And we have a lot of oil field workers, a lot of loggers, a lot of farmers in Alberta. They're just getting raked over the coals on their taxes. And we're fixing them, of course. We're fixing everybody's taxes in Alberta. But what does that say? When Alberta's population is what, 4.5 million people? And
4.8.
4.8 million people. Half of my client base for income tax and GST concerns are from Alberta. There's 9 other provinces and 3 territories. And the numbers of clients that we have from those areas don't line up with how many we have in Alberta. So what the hell is going on? Why is Alberta getting hit so hard federally? Please tell me.
Well, just literally a couple kilometers south of me is the wealthiest postal code in all of Canada. It's Elbow Valley. And that's a lot of oil patch. I live on the west side of the city. I'm just outside of the city of Calgary in Rocky View, Springbank. And this is where a lot of oil executives live and have their homes and their hobby acreages and ranches and stuff like that. So, I remember when there were changes to the royalty reviews. And, if somebody's worth $10 million and you shave off $3 million of their net worth, they have no problem stroking a $50,000 check to an independence party because they're sick and tired of getting messed with. So that's how this goes. If you mess with people's rice bowls, then they look for another option. And I understand it. I think Albertans have just put up with a lot for too long. And, we had our first black gusher with Leduc in 1947. And that's been a driver of the Alberta economy ever since. We didn't like the National Energy Program and what Pierre Elliott Trudeau did. We didn't like Marc Lalonde for thinking that he wanted to not allow the economic focus of the country to move from Montreal and Toronto out to Calgary. I remember when Richard Magnus was one of the MLAs, member of the Legislative Assembly here in Alberta for North Hill, he was proposing a flat tax, We have a flat tax of 10%. Notley tried to change that, but he was proposing eliminating income tax. At that time, Alberta, because of our royalties, could have eliminated income tax. If we had eliminated income tax, the amount of money that would have flowed in from Toronto, Calgary clears the second largest amount of corporate paper in the country after Toronto. If we'd actually eliminated income tax under Ralph Klein with the bill that Richard Magnus brought forward, we would have had a whole bunch of corporate headquarters move out here, and we would have unquestionably been the largest clearer of corporate paper in all of Canada. So, we have law firms like Bennett Jones Verschere, named after the former Prime Minister R.B. Bennett, who was representative of Calgary West, or West Calgary at the time, back in the time of the Great Depression. They were doing 90% of the Russian oil field contracts. When we have that type of economic activity, you just get fed up.
Okay. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because as the rest of Canadians don't know, or mostly don't know, Alberta does not have any sales tax. Why? Because of oil and potash. There's so much money being made within the province that you don't need a provincial sales tax, which should be all the incentive. Most of you should need to go to Alberta and stop paying these ridiculous provincial sales tax on chocolate bars and haircuts. It's kind of crazy. So I want to make Calgary completely tax-free. Now, when I say that, as I've been here in Panama, there are remarkable parts of the country down here that have what are called economic free zones. There is a city at the north end of the Panama Canal called Colon. It's spelled C-O-L-O-N. Downtown core Colon is literally 1/3 the size of the privately run city right next door, which is called the Colon Economic Free Zone. It's a walled city with just retail. That's all that it is. And it is absolutely bizarre to be in a city that is private, first off, all retail, and bigger than most cities you've ever been to. And it's all tax-free. There's no tax on anything. They're selling motorcycles brand new for $900. $900 brand new motorcycle.
Are they Harleys? Are they Indians? What are they?
Not Indians. They are not Harleys, and they are not Ridleys. No. Okay. There's stuff I've never heard of, but I don't know. By 5, one burns out, it doesn't matter. You got 4 more. Yeah. Think about that. But what I have also discovered, not only are the economic free zones in Panama and other countries, but as all of you know, I do income tax. Rob, there's not one law in Canada that says you have to pay income tax. Not one. There's just the Canada Revenue Agency relying on threats and people's fear of prison time, thinking that there are tax laws that say you have to do a tax return and you got to pay tax. Not one. So if I win the mayorship of Calgary, I'm going to protect everybody who's got a residence or business or even rents inside the city of Calgary from the CRA, and we're going to use the SWAT boys to go and arrest all the CRA reps inside the city and tell them it's a free zone. It's an economic free zone. We're not paying federal tax anymore. That would also include Canada Pension Plan and EI, because there's not one of our clients who applies for EI that actually gets it. They're not paying it anymore. So why are we paying it? Now, how does that sound, everybody? Yeehaw.
I'll vote for you over Gondek any day. Yeah. No, sales tax. I remember when I first got elected to the House of Commons, I went out to Ottawa, learning where the bathrooms are, rented, an apartment, and was looking to set myself up with a bed because I was tired of staying at the Travel Lodge or, whatever. And so I went down Bank Street in Ottawa, walked into a futon shop and saw a thing that would work for a bed. And I said, what does that come to with all taxes included, etc.? And she gave me this much higher number than what I was anticipating, because I'm from Alberta. I wasn't used to the HST and, all that type of stuff, the PST, etc., that they had at that time. And so she quoted me the number. I was taken aback. I said, why so high? And she said, oh, well, we have the PST. And I said, huh? And she says, I said, well, I'm from Alberta. We don't pay the PST type of thing. And she said, oh, but the PST, it pays for hospitals, roads, bridges, all that stuff. And I said, I'm from Alberta. We have hospitals, we have roads, we have bridges. We don't have a PST. You've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed. What are you talking about? Yeah, no, yeah, we're just, at the rallies, thousands of people. There's going to be 60 rallies across the province in the next few months. Imagine in Alberta with no GST, with no carbon tax, with no federal income tax, et cetera. Like, oh my, like, I mean, it
would be rich. There would be trillions of dollars pouring into it just from people wanting to invest. Every oil magnate in the world would be there.
Yeah. So, I mean, third largest oil reserves in the world, established oil reserves in the world, and not having to leave, $70 billion with Ottawa, which they waste 43 billion of. I mean,
yeah. Actually, I got to say something, Rob, because as everybody watching my show knows, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police watch every episode of my show. They document everything I'm saying. CSIS, our spy agency, they're quite pathetic, actually, but they watch this show. I know. I've seen my CSIS file. So CSIS and RCMP, could you do me a favor? Go to Danielle Smith right now, the premier of the province of Alberta, and tell her that if she gets Alberta to separate and works with me to get rid of all federal tax, she will have a job as president of Alberta for the rest of her life, because the amount of money that she would have access to, it would be literally trillions, plural, trillions of dollars. That is how wealthy Alberta could be with the right leadership. Now, let's talk about this. Mark Carney and Danielle Smith, they have some kind of a battle going on here. I'm willing to go to my way and say that the federal election was both rigged, but also assisted by the stupidity of Canadians. Maybe you could back me up on that one, or maybe you won't. Let me hear it quickly.
Well, it sometimes drives me to distraction where people say, oh, there was no cheating in the previous election. I've been involved up to my eyeballs in a lot of elections, whether it's by-elections, provincial elections in other countries. Like, I've done a lot of that. And I would venture to say that in almost every single election, there is some attempt at cheating. Okay. So for people to say that doesn't go on is bogus. But for example, I mean, I'm shocking the Liberals got reelected when some of the candidates were so obviously agents of foreign governments like China. My gosh, when are we going to get off the addiction to? It's when China steals coronavirus from Canadian laboratories in Winnipeg, and then weaponizes it and does gain of function to it. And then our idiot Prime Minister Trudeau goes ahead and buys 8 vials, for every man, woman, and child of what they've developed as a vaccine, a jab. I refuse to call them vaccines; they're jabs. mRNA, from that. That's if he's not treasonous at first for allowing the Chinese and their People's Liberation Army operatives into our bio, lab in Winnipeg, then surely to God, buying the weaponized version of this vaccine, of this jab, of this mRNA off the Chinese, then, I mean, that's got to be treasonous. And then to have agents of that government running for the Liberal Party and to be disqualified to be replaced by another agent of that same government, et cetera, in the north of Toronto in the Markham area, it's ridiculous. It's laughable. It's so absurd. So there's no doubt that China tries to manipulate the elections in this country. I mean, the evidence is just overwhelming. Sam Cooper did a great job of exposing that. What do you say? What do you say when a country's gone down that route so far? The RCMP even would admit that there are 4,000 criminal entities trying to infiltrate and abuse the Canadian government, of which 270 they've identified actually have positions in the government. Like, the country is so overdue for a draining the swamp scenario.
Yeah, it is due for that because as it stands, I mean, if you read the headlines today, the biggest headline in Toronto is that there's two men being looked for by police because they wrote down the words "No more Muslims" on a park bench. That's it. That is what our police are focused on, is these little squabbles going on all over the country between religious groups. We we don't care. Anybody with a brain in their heads does not care about the opinions of anyone. You can dislike whatever you like, or at least you should be allowed to dislike whatever you like and voice your opinion on that. That's what the cops are focused on in Canada. They're not focused on arresting these Chinese infiltrators. They're not focused on arresting any of these foreign entities, like, well, even radical Islamic groups right now are running the banks in the province of Ontario. No investigations are being done whatsoever. None. So, what is the solution? The solution, in my mind, is for Albertans, if they want to be rich, is get out. Get out. You've got to take a day off work and go to these rallies, everybody. They actually are starting to work because Danielle Smith, the premier of the province of Alberta, has no choice now but to listen to those with money. And the oil magnates who have all left Canada, they will come back. If she says she's not going to cooperate with any of this green energy nonsense, she won't cooperate with Mark Carney and is willing to do a deal with the Americans to either become a protectorate or a state. Yeah, Danielle, I hope you're watching. You personally will be a billionaire if you do
this. Just to talk about the oil patch that way, because Calgary is, the epicenter of this stuff. Shell has a building downtown Calgary. They sold off 97% of their assets. They had 2 floors in that building that were still operable. And there were so few people, and the lights were triggered by people walking around by motion sensors. So people would have to get up from their desk to go and grab a cup of coffee to trigger the motion sensors just to keep the lights on in the Shell building. And that just goes to show you that this country has become so corrosive to oil and gas development that Shell, massive multinational corporation, sold out 97% of their assets and literally has a mothballed building downtown Calgary. So there's, like I said, Alberta's just suffered enough, and I think people are going to see the massive attendance at these rallies. The education that I'm seeing go on with the Alberta Prosperity Project to educate Alberta seniors about how much better they'd be off with an Alberta-run pension than what the CPP is offering. I also remember when I was a member of Parliament for the Reform Party, Paul Martin wanted to raise the contribution rates from 5.5% to 9.9%. And Mike Harris in Ontario said, we're out. Quebec was out. All we needed was one more province to not allow for that to happen. And we made a presentation with the Reform Party to Klein and some of his people. And I was shocked that they didn't opt out, because it had Alberta at that point established our own pension system. We could have had a contribution rate of probably about 3%, because we have a younger demographic and a higher employment participation rate. We could have probably done it at 3%. The employers would have matched at 3%. We would have been providing a better pension, individualized accounts, based on what Chicago School of Economics Milton Friedman was recommending to Chile decades ago. We could have a far, far better system with better payouts and everything else, and contributing 1/3 the amount we do.
Is Danielle Smith going to take Alberta out of Canada? Let's hear this.
Well, I don't think she wants to lead that parade. I mean, she backed Jean Charest during the federal leadership process rather than Pierre Poilievre and some of the other options. And he's, as much a Laurentian, Quebec centrist, Central Canada guy as you could choose. So I don't think that's where her heart is. But that being said, I'm watching the poll numbers. I'm seeing what's happening. And I think the majority, at least half, if not the majority, of her UCP support membership base voters are in favor of secession.
Oh, I absolutely am. Nothing would thrill me more than seeing Alberta split. I only lived in Alberta for about 3.5 years. but I fell in love with the place. It is beautiful. The people are different than Toronto, than Ottawa, than Montreal, than Vancouver. The people, I dare say, better from the standpoint of their behavior and just their acceptance of others. It's a very friendly place. Even today, it's still a friendly place to be. I had a blast living there. Now, I can't stand the politics of Alberta. The cops I could do without, and the courts I could absolutely do without. But the people are great. And the fact that there is that much oil, there's that much potash, there's that many natural resources there, I would join the army and fight for Alberta to become independent, is what I'm saying. It needs to happen.
Well,
If Alberta wants to remain, go ahead.
My vision of that is, a lot of U.S. states and frankly provinces, territories historically, even in British North America and Canada, had reserves, and I would love an Alberta reserve. What does that mean? Switzerland, for example, has a Schützenfest every year that people participate in, and males now between the ages of 18 and 35, used to be 18 to 54 historically, but would participate in that. They might spend a weekend a month doing shooting competitions or what have you. Now, I'm not saying that's mandatory or anything like that, but if say, for example, there's even a competition once a year, a Schützenfest, and somebody participated in that, I would want to have them issued a certificate that therefore all of their firearms are protected. Nobody can lay claim on them, etc., because they're part of an Alberta reserve. And if you went so far as what Switzerland did, where you said all males between the ages of 1835 or 1854 can participate, no forcing them, just can participate if they choose to in an Alberta reserve, they could receive, some sort of benefit, whether it's with regard to their firearms or ammunition or whatever is the case is in Switzerland, or maybe a tax benefit or whatever, tax credit, whatever. But I mean, we're in a crazy scenario where the CRA has more employees than the Department of National Defense does.
Yeah, and about 30,000 of them were hired from Pakistan, India, Southeast Asia, African countries. Most don't speak English. And just for the record, they are incredibly easy to irritate. And I do this on behalf of my clients all the time. I shut down these vitriolic and vicious people who are contacting my clients all the time. I'd like to do that for the entire city of Calgary. I would love to actually have a task force in the city of Calgary as mayor of Calgary, specifically to find out where all of these CRA agents live and just go arrest each and every one of them, and then help Calgarians who've had their properties harmed in some way put liens on the properties of the homes of all these CRA agents. I had a conversation. There's a guy named Mark McDonald. He works for the Canada Revenue Agency. He's been harassing clients of mine for a while. So every single time I talk to this guy, I'm extremely jovial. It drives him nuts, by the way. Marky, baby, how you doing? So good to hear your voice. And he keeps telling me that I have no business calling him. We have no business dealings at all. And I keep challenging him. Show me you've got power. Please, Mark, show me you've got power. Well, now he's decided to take on a client of mine who lives in Calgary. Uh-oh. Could you imagine if I was mayor of Calgary? There'd be a warrant for him like that. And I would send this task force out, probably wearing masks. Hey, guys, you know what? Go get him. Go get him and then drop him off somewhere in Calgary so the Calgary guys can go get him. Kind of like what Batman did to that villain who hid in Hong Kong in the Dark Knight movie. Same idea. Go get him, bring him over here, because he has to pay for his crimes. The Canada Revenue Agency are criminals. They steal, they lie, they extort, they commit fraud on a daily basis. They're using the crime of intimidation. That's 5 years in a federal penitentiary to threaten Canadians into giving them money. Not if I'm mayor of Calgary. So we need these task forces, and we need these militias, and we need them in Alberta now. Your thoughts?
I want to put out a thought about a friend of mine, David Elderfield, who, I've been harassed by the CRA. I had 7 criminal charges thrown at me, all thrown out of court, and I have to take them to tax court to get some of my money back. But, poor David, they took his house from him. They took his business. They prevented it from being sold for 14 million American, or about 20 million Canadian. his invention would have allowed to check 95% of the containers that are coming in from China into the ports, and right now only about 5% are being checked. And so he would have dramatically reduced the amount of drugs and human smuggling, cargo, etc., whatever coming in from China. But anyhow, he was harassed and shut down by the CRA. And a guy like him would benefit tremendously. Like, I mean, he's actually well documented how the CRA is actually engaged in the international definition of torture with regard to himself and how he has been treated by them. So I wish him tremendous success, and that people follow his case, because his experience with them has gone on even longer than my. I have to count the years now, the saga. Mine's gone on 10 years since they started it, and the audits went back to 2012, so that's 13 years. His has gone on for much longer than that, and he's lost a lot more money even than I have. So he certainly has a torture case.
And the funny part about that, and it's not really funny, there's no other term to use, is that they actually are not a police force. They have no authority of any kind. I'm wondering how they actually are getting away with taking people's companies. Who are they using for this? Are they hiring outside mercenaries? What's going on?
Well, in my case, for example, they came up with an entirely erroneous amount of money, which they still claim. And when I was selling a property to try to get out from under some of these bills, they wouldn't transfer the title. They wouldn't allow for the transfer of the title unless that bill was paid. And it was absolutely egregious. So now I have to take them to tax court to get some of that money back. And just so people understand how ridiculous this is, my case alone has over 60,000 pages of documentation. And they don't want 60,000 pages. They don't want to honor the access to information requests to divulge all of the political interference that has happened in my case. 60,000 pages. There's no way you can have 60,000 pages of information on my case without massive political interference from Ottawa. It's not possible.
Rob, I know it's not possible, but I just want to maybe bring something to your attention here in reference to how the Canada Revenue Agency functions, especially under the Liberal government that currently is ruling the land. They were bragging in February of this year that they just got their 52nd conviction for income tax evasion. Of course, you know me, I had to read everything on this. Factor this in, everybody. That was over the course of 5 years. It took them 5 years to get 52 convictions in court for income tax evasion. Now, that's in comparison to 200 million tax returns that were done in that same amount of time. It doesn't even show up as 1%. It doesn't even show up as 10 zeros after the decimal point percent. Then I read further into it. Not one of these 52 cases were the CRA the ones who filed the initial charge. It was always by some police force somewhere in the country from a complaint from somebody who doesn't work for the CRA. Right. The CRA just would submit a little bit of evidence saying, oh, guys, could you try to get us a conviction so that we can say that we did it? That's all that it was. When I read all 52 of these cases, none of them went to trial. Each and every one of the people that were charged did a plea deal to get out of the charge and, of course, not spend money. None of them did jail time, all suspended sentences. So if the CRA is going to brag that they can get you a conviction for income tax evasion, you better start winning in trials. Not one of them went to trial. And only 52 people out of 200 million tax returns? Wow. So they've got nothing. And that's why I'm wondering who in the hell it was that really came after you. I don't think it was the CRA. I think it might have been the RCMP or CSIS. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it was the CRA. I know I've talked with some of my colleagues, Art Hanger, I see what you're saying. I think it was the cabinet. I think it was literally the Liberal cabinet. That's what I believe. They don't want to divulge that because we even had an auditor out of Winnipeg who reported back to his political masters saying that there was nothing there. That was very early on in the case. very early on, and yet his political masters insisted that they go forward. I mean, I've had people who worked as staff in the CRA for 11 years who told me that they couldn't get the focus like they put on me with Chinese triads that were laundering $10 million in gambling money between 6 different numbered corporations. And when they tried to, I'm serious, when they tried to get the resources to go after those Chinese triads, they were told, oh, it's too small a fish, don't worry about it. Well, in my case, okay, the biggest thing they were going after was capital gains on a primary residence, which is the issue we're going to be going before the courts with. And the second one was over forks and spoons on a restaurant in Ottawa. It was a total of $4,000 in capital gains they claim. Okay.
On forks and spoons.
How do you generate $60,000 of paperwork on 60,000 pages of paperwork on?
Must be a really nice fork.
Well,
Wow.
it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Did the Queen of England engrave it? Like, what happened?
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Well, that's my thought. That's my thought. And for those who are watching on Rumble, I know you can't see it on Kick and Instagram and TikTok, but the bookshelf that you've got behind you there, that's what 10 feet of bookshelf compared to like what 600 feet of bookshelves you've got inside that house. They overturned the whole place. And I do believe that it was the Liberal Party that did that to you, much the same way that the Liberals did that to me. They put me in prison in Alberta because they didn't want me winning the Calgary mayor race. We know that the whole system is corrupt. And that's, you bring me to a really good point I want to make with everybody watching. Had your house not been in your name, they wouldn't have been able to make a single play for it. If your house had been in a numbered corporation with you as just the shareholder, but private shareholder, and not published anything about it, they couldn't have done a damn thing about it. And that's where we need to lead all Canadians. You can't have a house in your name in Canada. You can't have a car in your name in Canada. You can't even have bank accounts in your name in Canada anymore. It's all got to be hidden in numbered corporations. Now, fortunately, I'm here to do this for you, folks. Get a hold of me if you want to hide your house and car and money. But Rob, getting back to the election here with Mark Carney winning, aside from we know it's a rigged election, we know Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and those weird provinces on the East Coast are the ones that do all the strange voting. But let's talk economically now, because you know me, I love money, and rich people out there love money, and everybody out there would like a little bit more money. What does Mark Carney winning the Prime Ministership of Canada actually do now for the economy or to the economy? Take it away.
Well, there's no doubt there's more carbon taxes coming because he said so in the past, even though he lowered them for the purpose of the election. He's taking on trillions, potentially tens of trillions of dollars in foreign debt, which any one of those basket case countries defaults type of thing in Canada's on the hook. They're talking about home equity taxes. They're pursuing that. This guy has been involved with the World Economic Forum for a very, very long time. So this whole idea that you will own nothing and you will be happy, like that's, Carney's one of these guys who thinks it's perfectly okay to direct what you do with central bank digital currency or tax you to the point where you don't own anything or take away your primary residence, etc. Meanwhile, he hides his stuff, as Ezra's done a good job of reporting down in Bermuda and some of these other tax havens, right? So that's how these guys snake around this stuff. I mean, we did a countdown in the UK for 3 years to get rid of him because he was punishing Great Britain for voting for Brexit because they didn't want to lose their traditions and culture to Brussels, and he was punishing them for daring to defy the EU on this stuff. And now he's going to do the same thing that he did to Great Britain, where he punished Britain for years until they could get rid of him. He's going to punish Canadians now.
Yeah, his wife, I'm not convinced his wife is a woman. I'm really not. came out and said that she couldn't wait to have his husband, make Canada poor. She actually said that. What the hell?
One of the things that I was disappointed with on election night, there were many things, but uh, I thought the Bloc was going to do better in Quebec. I thought the Bloc was going to get on an optimistic maybe 33 seats, on a pessimistic maybe 28 seats. They wound up getting 22, and I think they've just lost one, so it's now maybe down to 21. And I'm shocked that they voted for this Carney, Bank of England guy whose wife speaks with an obviously British accent. Like I don't understand. I don't understand what Quebec did. I don't understand it. I don't know why they voted Liberal. I don't get it.
Yeah, for those who don't understand what the Bloc is, it's a political party. It's a federal political party called the Bloc des Québécois, and they're a federal party, but they only care about Quebec. And they state that we only care about Quebec. We will do whatever it takes to interfere with the rest of the country. And it's a federal party. It's weird how that functions, but that just goes to show that Quebec still does consider itself a distinct society. And if Quebec can do it and they have nothing to offer the country, why can't Alberta do it? Because Alberta has everything to offer the country. Go ahead.
Well, I remember when I was first elected as a Reform MP back in the 1990s, and you have to remember the Bloc was a little bit different back then. I mean, once Duceppe got in, he was a trade union guy, and he replaced a lot of the MPs with kind of the left of center. But back when I was there, they were still the remnant of people who'd left the Mulroney caucus, and along with Lucien Bouchard to create the Bloc. So a lot of them were from rural Quebec and still had kind of culturally conservative roots. So these guys would say to me continuously back in the 90s then, they would say, why is it that Alberta isn't doing everything that Quebec is doing? Like, why don't you guys do your own EI and your own pension and your own police and your own tax collection? Like, what is wrong with you? Why are you paying the bills to Ottawa? Like, we got out of this stuff years ago. Like, what the hell is wrong with you people? And they were right. Alberta was drunk with oil revenue, and was overpaying, was subsidizing socialism and all these programs, across the rest of the country, and subsidizing the bureaucracy and the waste in Ottawa. And those guys were right. I know we tried to convince Klein to opt out of the increase in the CPP contributions. Alberta could have done its own thing at 3% rather than 9.9. Would have been a far, 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 far better scenario.
Would have been absolutely remarkable. And one of the things maybe I'll point out, I covered this a couple of weeks ago in a show about why Quebec is so bizarre compared to the rest of the country. And it's because the province is on civic law and not on common law or admiralty law, as they call it in the rest of the country. And Alberta could do that. Alberta could just flip a switch and go civic. And that way it would have its own internal revenue service, if you will, like Revenu de Québec. They're tough to deal with as a tax guy. But it works. Quebec makes a lot of money with their own revenue collection agency. Alberta could do exactly the same thing. So ultimately speaking here, Mark Carney is going to chase the green energy nonsense out there. He's going to put carbon tax on all of us. Could you please now, just for the next couple of minutes, tell us, is there a warning you want to issue, or is there something you want to tell Canadians about where the economy is really going to go with all of these implementations of green energy nonsense? Please.
Yeah, Carney's going to make Justin Trudeau look good. I think within a year, the stink that was on Justin Trudeau is going to be on Carney, because if he just does what he says he's wanted to do, okay, which is grab guns, home equity tax, higher carbon taxes, etc. I mean, it's and the global bonds, the green bonds, where he's going to take on trillions of dollars of European debt, the inflationary pressure of all that, etc. I mean, he is going to be so much worse for the Canadian economy than Justin Trudeau was. I mean, Trudeau was kind of inept and, etc. and what have you, but Carney is like a high priest of globalism. This guy is the chosen one as far as the World Economic Forum and Schwab and these characters go. I mean, he's way more into drinking the Kool-Aid of that stuff than Trudeau would have been, and that was bad. Yeah, it's going to be terrible. And I sadly, because they're so close to having majority, and with the NDP having propped them up over these years, and them being so close to having what they need to have the majority, I've been told there's a deal that's already been brokered. What's going to happen is the NDP dropped down to 7 seats, and the previous threshold for having party status and therefore getting, committee status and research money and everything else. What's going to happen is the Liberals are going to negotiate that down to 7 from 12, and so now the NDP is going to have access to committee resources and to parliamentary research budgets and all that type of stuff that they were out of, and question period time, et cetera, et cetera. And then what's going to happen is next time when the budget comes up in the spring of 2026 next year, the NDP is probably going to prop them up, no matter how terrible the policy ideas are. And I expect the guy who's going to pay for that is Ebbie in BC. I think people are going to be so miffed with the MDP propping up the Liberals that they will probably lose their government in BC. I mean, I'm not going to shed tears over it. I'd rather see Russ dead as the Premier of British Columbia, so no problem there. And then the last man standing is going to be Wab Kinew in Manitoba as an NDP government.
The New Democratic Party is what Rob is talking about here. They call themselves the New Democrat Party. They are as communist as they come. And I did infiltrate them back in 2017. I sat in on 2 meetings. They were holding them down at Regent Park in Toronto, which is, the dangerous part of Toronto. And in there, this morbidly obese woman stands up and says she's a nurse at Toronto General Hospital, and says that if she had it her way, that she would let everybody who's Christian die. She literally said that. We need to work towards killing Christians. And she was going to start by not treating them in the Toronto General Hospital. They eventually figured out who I was and kicked me out of the party forever. I wasn't a member. I was just someone who said I wanted to be a part of it. They are insane. They are crazy people, the NDP. And I don't really want to see any of them there. By the way, for everybody who cannot see the Rumble screen right now, the gentleman I am talking to is Rob Anders, who was a member of the Canadian Parliament for 18 years. He is a banking expert, has had the extreme displeasure of being in the same room with jihadi Justin Trudeau. Obviously, he does not agree with Trudeau. And Rob is one of maybe 5 politicians brave enough to ever come on this show. And I got to ask, I mean, is this show really so bad?
Well, I think probably what scares some of them is they don't like calling a spade, right? So when you challenge, whether it's the situation with regard to China and its subversion of Canada, or whether or not Islamic Jihad fits with the Christian nation, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that a lot of politicians are too scared to address. They don't want to talk about them.
Oh, and not at all. Mm-hmm. They absolutely can't stand it. And every single solitary newspaper and radio station and TV station and magazine and blog in Canada has at some point called me racist or Islamophobic, homophobic, transphobic, and whatever other insults they've cooked up. You know what it did for me, Ron? As soon as I left Canada, all that free press has made me a millionaire. Literally a millionaire. So I want to say thank you to CBC and CTV and City TV, Toronto Star, Calgary Herald, Montreal Gazette, Vancouver Sun, and all you left-wing nut jobs out there who just can't stop talking about me. Thank you for the $50 million plus of free advertising. So you got to enjoy the conflict that these left-wing media outlets are going to bring. Do you have any advice in our last 11 minutes here? Do you have any advice for Canadians on how they can ride this 4-year Liberal storm out with Prime Minister Mark Carney? Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to hope that provincial governments have their provincially regulated financial institutions institute where 1% of their assets has to be in like gold, silver, copper, oil, something really tangible, because I'm fairly confident that Mark Carney is going to want to bring in central bank digital currency. And mark my words, for those who work in the chartered federal banks, that will mean a drastic reduction of what they do in retail banking, and a collapse probably of some of those banks, and drastic problems for the Canadian economy. So if we have provinces with right of center governments, like, say, for example, Saskatchewan and Alberta, Ontario, etc., who make their financial institutions have 1% of their assets in something tangible, I hope it will encourage Canadians to put their money into those provincially regulated institutions rather than the federal ones, because I think Carney is coming for them. And that's not going to be good. And the more money that is put in those provincial institutions and protected by having some form of assets to back them up, the better, because otherwise you're going to have these people crash the economy and crash the currency. So there's that. I predict. I also predict that I was at a conference on the weekend where I was listening to Martin Armstrong, who has done a lot of work in currency and gold bullion and what have you. And he and I, and Margaret Thatcher, for that matter, who's now passed away, all share the same opinion. The euro will collapse. You can't have 20 plus countries, all with 23 variables in a macroeconomic formula, to try to figure out what the value of the euro is. Okay, so if you got each of these different countries has different savings rates, different productivity rates, different gross national product, different taxation rates, etc. All these things that go into calculating that. You can't have a currency that makes sense for all of those countries when there's such a tremendous disparity between, say, for example, a Greece and a Germany, just for example, just two examples. So I believe the euro will collapse. Margaret Thatcher said that she thought the only thing that made sense in the European Union was the common market, so that Czech crystal could be bought by people in other countries without the government's skimming tariffs. Similarly for British cod, German steel, etc., etc. So the common market made sense, but the lack of immigration controls, which Europe is facing with regard to all the refugees, etc., and the currency problems, which France just barely is skating out of, and like I said, the sick men of Europe, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, and with their $6 trillion worth of debt. I believe the euro will go down. It's just a question of when. And when it happens, and if Canada is holding trillions of dollars of that European debt, which Mark Carney wants to do, that's going to be a default bankruptcy situation for Canada as well.
I got a question now. All right, so that's a very, very, very frightening prospect, right? A good point. Yeah. So what happens here is, let's say the euro tanks, Carney's carrying euro debt in Canada, the Canadian dollar tanks along with it. What happens to Canadian property values?
Well, it's a travesty, right? Because if your dollar drops and if people do a run on the banks in Europe or in Canada, both, it's like some of the banks, we would have had Canadian banks collapse during what happened with Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, and the AIG stuff back in 2007, 2008. I have guys that I know that I went to university with who were, working, selling, treasury bills and bonds and stuff like that, and whatever, in the bond markets. And those guys told me we were 72 hours away from a total credit collapse. So, if Europe goes down, if those countries default, and Canada is holding that debt, it's going to be terrible. And it's not just going to affect Canada, because some of the Canadian banks actually hold appreciable mortgages in the United States as well. The only reason we didn't fall down to the same extent that Lehman Brothers and some of these others did was because Carney, who was Harper's choice as governor of the Bank of Canada, they used the Bank of Canada, the Federal Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and even U.S. Funds to buy out the bad debt from some of those Canadian chartered banks. Otherwise, our banks would have been in just as much trouble, and those banks are still in trouble. So when that default comes, it's going to be ugly. And frankly, and I say this for the Americans out there and for the Trump administration, I don't. If you have that run on the European banks and the Canadian banks, I don't know how the hell they don't have a run on American banks. I don't know how they escape that.
I can't imagine that they could escape that, and that's a very big problem. So, yeah, and let's do layman term now, because you're a clever man and you've got a massive vocabulary. If the Canadian dollar crashes, do property values crash with it?
Well, they kind of have to. I mean, there's going to be a flight to reserves of capital. So that's the reason why gold keeps going up. It's the reason why silver keeps going up. I think that even the United States at some point may face the pressure to repeg to gold. Um, I've been watching some of what Jim Rickards has to say on this type of stuff, because I think that gold and silver are still undervalued compared to what the instability is. So I think there's still going to be a greater flight to those precious metals. So people who hold that are doing better off, because like there's nothing backing our dollar in Canada. The only thing, like we're one of 12 countries that have no bullion reserves whatsoever. Mark Carney sold them off when he was governor of the Bank of Canada. He sold off the last of the reserves. So there's nothing there to back those at all. And all we've got is, when Brian Mulroney was prime minister, we did 80% of our trade with the United States, our foreign trade. Now it's about 60%, but that's still massive. And that's all we got going for us. That's the only thing that keeps Canada afloat. And the biggest part of that is oil and natural gas, Alberta oil and natural gas. And so if it's a mess, folks. And people, there's going to be a reckoning that comes over this. There's no way you can take on trillions of dollars of European debt in countries that have problems with default and not pay the price for this.
The last question then before our show is over here. If the property market crashes along with this crash that Mark Carney is bringing to the country, do people lose their deeds on their land and their homes?
Well, we had, say, for example, in 2007, 2008, okay, in the US, property values took a 30% hit. That didn't happen in Canada. And it was only because between Harper and Carney, they figured out how to buy the crap debt off of the Canadian chartered banks. So we haven't had that housing correction in Canada. That's coming. In the US, they took a haircut of 30%. I think that's bound to happen in Canada. It's just a matter of time. And and then if we're taking on trillions of dollars in European debt on top of that, it's not good. We see consumer credit is going up, where people have more and more household debt on their credit cards. Get out of that stuff. And if you can pay down your mortgages and stuff, do that, because like I said, there's a reckoning coming. And when those banks go under, it's not going to be pretty. It's really not going to be pretty. I don't think people fully understand how bad that's going to be.
No, I don't think they do. And I'm going to be explaining that for everybody in a future show. Rob, tell everybody who you are one more time and tell them how to reach you if they're curious. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was a member of Parliament for 18 years. I started off with the Reform Party, and then with the Canadian Alliance under Stockwell Day, and then finally with the Conservative Party federally. robforblue@gmail.com. I regularly put out stuff where I trash central bank digital currency. I've been licking my wounds over the last month with regard to the federal election, but I'm starting to climb out of that hole and starting to try to tell people more about central bank digital currency and things that we can do.
Oh, don't you worry. You're coming back to talk more about that in a future show. Rob, it's always a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Good to see you, my friend.
Take care. Rob Anders, everybody. Wow, this guy is just remarkable. He gave me a full-blown training course on how to run a proper campaign when I was running for mayor of Calgary back in 2021. An absolute wealth of knowledge, and I was so happy to have him on the show again tonight. So we're not telling you any of this to frighten you. We're asking all of you to start paying attention to politics, pay attention to money, pay attention to the markets, and protect what you have. You heard him. If you got a mortgage, pay it off. Stop using credit cards to pay all your household bills. There's a lot of ways that you can protect your fiscal financial future in Canada. Lots of ways. I will be covering all of those in all of the upcoming future shows. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Tax and Money Show that runs every single Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time right here on freedomreport.ca. I'm going to see you all in a week. I love you all, and good night.